This evening we will go back to Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta. You remember a few days ago we were speaking about this discourse. The practice that we are doing is called Satipaṭṭhāna, and there's two major collections of teachings about this practice. You find one collection in the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta. This appears twice in the canon. And there's also the Satipaṭṭhāna Sañutta, the collection of brief discourses about Satipaṭṭhāna. The modern methods of Satipaṭṭhāna are all based on these teachings, on these sutras. Here we've been looking at the opening section of the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, and we went through especially the Buddha describes the practitioner doing the four foundations or the four establishments of mindfulness. Here a practitioner surrendering longing and dejection for the world, lives tracking body as body, feeling as feeling, mind as mind, phenomena as phenomena, ardent, mindful and clearly understanding. And we went through that sentence. So then the Buddha starts to apply this to specific aspects of the practice. And the first one that he talks about is anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. Tonight what we're going to do is go through some of the section on breathing, and if we have time we'll move on to the chorus of the discourse and see how he talks about the process of getting started on a meditation object and then moving into it. Tonight we're talking about breathing, but the same basic process applies to any meditation object. Here we're specifically talking about breathing. The Buddha begins, here a practitioner goes into a forest or to the root of a tree or to an empty place, sits down, crosses her legs, straightens her back and establishes her mindfulness directly. Mindfully she breathes in, mindfully she breathes out. So this is describing the practitioner. First, the location. A forest, the root of a tree, or an empty place. I think according to the tradition, this hall would be regarded as an empty place. Although it's not really empty. It's full of people. But it's not full of disturbances. So we have a dedicated place that we go to do the practice. The practitioner sits down, crosses her legs, straightens her back. Now this is the only thing that the Buddha ever says about posture, which is interesting because when we teach, we spend a lot of time and energy working on posture. I think the reason why it's not mentioned, firstly, a lot of the postural work would be part of the oral tradition rather than something recorded. In other words, yoga. Whatever yoga traditions that they had at the time of the Buddha, they wouldn't have bothered recording this. But also, of course, at the Buddha's time, Indians would have very little furniture. They would basically live on the floor. Sitting down on the ground with your legs crossed would be about as complicated and difficult an operation as sitting in a comfortable chair in front of a TV would be to us. So obviously if you're writing a meditation manual and if your meditation posture involves relaxing in a chair, you don't really have to say very much. You just say, you find a nice chair and you sit down. You wouldn't need to give any more instruction. And so for the Buddha in his time, you don't need to give instruction on how to sit on the floor. It's obvious. Everybody knows how to do it. We, of course, have problems. So we have chairs and equipment and stretchers and all this sort of stuff. And then the practitioner establishes her mindfulness directly. Now this is an important phrase. How do we become mindful? How do we set it off? We've talked about losing mindfulness. Mindfulness is memory. The way I lose it is by forgetting. And as the days go by, if you're maintaining the commitment to be mindful throughout the day, what you'll be noticing more and more, becoming more and more sensitive toward, is how often we forget. We're constantly forgetting. So once we start to pay attention, once we start to actually try to be mindful, we find ourselves again and again and again waking up, having just forgotten, which can be quite discouraging at times. But this is the process. We start to study this whole process of how we forget and then how we remember. We forget, remember, forget, remember, forget, remember. This is the process of being mindful. And by studying this process as continuously as possible, that's how we learn mindfulness. That's how we develop it. It's very simple. We don't need necessarily to be sitting cross-legged in the hall. You can do this very successfully in ordinary, everyday activities. But it's keep reminding ourselves, I am already aware. Or keep reminding ourselves to be aware of the walking, to be aware of the eating, to be aware of the thinking, and so on. But how do we create the mindfulness? The verb that is used to talk about this is upatahati. It comes from the root sta, to stand, to station, and upa, nearby, to stand, to station something nearby. First of all, this idea of standing and stationing, it conveys firmness. One of the images that the Buddha uses to describe mindfulness, in one discourse, he gives an extended metaphor about taming a wild elephant. Taming our own minds is like taming a wild elephant. And so he goes through this whole process, which the Indians would have been very familiar with, because the elephants were the heavy machinery of their time. Capturing elephants, bringing them out of the forest and taming them was a major industry, a very important, skilled job. The Buddha is talking about this process, and he says at one point the trainer brings the elephant out of the forest to a place where there's a pillar or a post, a big post, firmly planted in the ground. He ties the elephant up with a thick rope, and then the elephant can't get past the rope. So there might be a very long rope, and the elephant can wander as far as that rope goes, but no further. The elephant is used to being free in the forest, but then discovers he's not free, he's trapped by that rope. He can only go as far as the rope, and that's it. And then gradually the rope is shortened and the elephant starts to calm down. The Buddha says the elephant loses his forest habits and memories, and eventually he calms down. Mindfulness is the pillar. It's firmly grounded in the earth, and it keeps us in one place. It's like we come to meditate and we sit down, we construct a posture, and we plant ourselves on the earth. That's it. I'm not moving, and I'm following my experience. I'm watching what happens. It may be good, it may be bad, it may be peaceful, it may be restless. I don't care. I'm just going to sit here and watch it. So I'm planted firmly in the earth. Or in the walking, I'm going to walk up and down, and I'm just going to watch what happens. It may be good, it may be bad, I may like it, I may dislike it, doesn't matter. I'm just going to watch it. And this is the basic training of calming the wild mind. So mindfulness has this quality of firmness. It's solid. It's fixed in the earth. And this is establishing mindfulness. You make it solid. And you also get this idea of establishing the mindfulness, planting it. And this is done directly. The term is parimukkam, which roughly translated is in your face, face to face. When we're noting a meditation object, we talk about noting the rising and falling, noting the secondary object. What this is talking about is a direct face-to-face encounter with the experience. Boom. Look it in the eyes. What is it? And this has a quality of directness to it. I like to give the example of, let's say someone comes in for interview and I say, how's it going? How's the meditation? They say, it's terrible. And I say, please describe meditation sitting period. And they might say, well, I sat down and tried to follow the breathing, but I couldn't because there was just so much thinking going on. And so it was a real struggle, and I got more and more frustrated because of this thinking, and finally I gave up. Has anything like this ever happened to you? No. Probably not. But it's amazing how many people will report this kind of experience. Now, if you were a meditation teacher, someone came in and they reported this, would you say that meditator was aware during the sitting? Yeah, I would. Because if they weren't aware, they could not have described it. They gave a very good description of the experience. So they must have been aware. Was the meditator mindful? I would say no. Why not? Because the meditator's attention was wobbling all over the place, not settled on anything. Now the meditator thinks that, of course, they couldn't be mindful because there's too much happening. But it's immediately, there are several objects of mindfulness that immediately present themselves as being obvious of what that meditator could have done. Number one, stop fooling about. Just examine the breathing. Don't make excuses. This is not a holiday camp. Put in some effort. Just do it. Okay, there's thinking. Okay, there's frustration. So what? Just follow the breathing. Make some effort. That's one possibility. This would have been the standard instruction that I would have received in Burma. The Sayadaws like this kind of instruction. Number two, you've got lots of thinking, and thinking is getting in the way of your meditation. Make thinking your meditation object, as we've been talking about as we had those exercises. Use thinking as the meditation object. Where is it? What is it? How do you know you are thinking? What does it feel like? Is it energetic? Is it dreamy? Is it strong? Is it weak? Where does it come from? Where does it go? Are there any gaps? You start to study the flow of the thinking. Could do that. Third possibility. You're getting really frustrated. Make frustration the meditation object. Frustration in some ways is easier than thinking. Thinking can be very rapid, unstable, difficult perhaps to get a hold of, but emotion, like frustration, is much more stable. You find it in the body. So when you feel frustration, where do you feel it? Where in the body do you feel it? What does it feel like? Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it wet? Is it dry? Is it strong? Is it weak? Is it the same or does it change? Make frustration your meditation object. 3 possibilities already. A 4th possibility. Take the awareness back and make the whole experience your meditation object. Be mindful of the whole experience of sitting there, trying to follow the breathing, but being interrupted by thinking and feeling frustrated. Make that whole package the meditation object and be mindful of that. You see, all these possibilities are there. But all of them have one thing in common: a direct face-to-face encounter with the experience. Face it, or face to face, not hiding away from it, not looking in the other direction and wishing it would go away, but turn and face it. What is it? And directly engage with it. This is establishing mindfulness directly. This is the relationship to experience that we cultivate when we are doing a mindfulness practice. Fundamentally, it does not matter what the meditation object is. Anything can be an object of mindfulness. What matters is the relationship, to directly face it. Look it in the eye. That is my meditation object. This direct, face-to-face encounter. The Buddha says the first thing you've got to do is do that. Get directly engaged with the experience. You notice at this point he's not mentioning any meditation object. Could be anything. Then he says, mindfully she breathes in, mindfully she breathes out. So then the awareness goes to the breathing, and the meditator breathes in and out mindfully. Now what does he mean by breathing in and out mindfully? He means remembering it. Direct your awareness to the breathing process and remember it. Keep reminding yourself, oh, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. In the Mahasi approach, we use the naming, rising, falling, when we're using the movements in the abdomen. If you're not using that, you may use the term in, out, in, out. This is simply a way of reminding ourselves, oh, I'm breathing in now. Oh, I'm breathing out now. Oh, now I'm breathing in. And now I'm breathing out. It's reminding ourselves again and again. So this is mindfully she breathes in, mindfully she breathes out. Tracking the breathing, reminding oneself, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. And then he goes on to say, breathing in a long breath, she understands she's breathing in a long breath. Breathing out a long breath, she understands she's breathing out a long breath. Breathing in a short breath, she understands she's breathing in a short breath. Breathing out a short breath, she understands she's breathing out a short breath. Now, first of all, you notice that you get this idea of long and short. Some people interpret this very literally, and so if you're working with breathing meditation, you might be told to deliberately breathe in long and then breathe out short, or you might be told specifically notice when it's long, notice when it's short. But I think really what he's getting at is you start to see the detail. So when we did the exercises on breathing, we included length. Is the movement associated with the inhalation longer or shorter than the movement associated with the exhalation? Is the movement associated with the exhalation longer or shorter than the movement associated with the inhalation? This is directing attention to long and short, to length. But you can go for other detail as well. Where is it? What shape is it? And so on. All the things we were talking about and more. So you see, it starts off general, just remembering the breathing, and from there it starts to get detailed, it starts to get specific. The details become important. So precision becomes important. We start to focus in on the object. What are the details of it? And the other thing you notice that the verb has changed. The basic verb is she understands. She's breathing in long, breathing in short. Understands. This is pajanati, which is the verb from which you get panya, wisdom. Also, you get sampajanya, clear understanding. You see a shift. It's not just focusing in on the detail of the experience, but beginning to understand what it's doing, how it is doing. There's some intelligence being brought into it here. What is the breath doing? How does it behave? What influences it? Does it stay the same or does it change? How does it change? There's bringing some inquiry, some investigation into it, trying to understand the whole process. So it's like we're monitoring it over a period of time, getting to know it, what it does, how it does what it does, becoming familiar with it, with the meditation object. The wisdom faculty is being brought into action. Some very basic examples would be, some people might be following the breathing and the mind gets very dull. They might even start to fall asleep. Now, this could be simply because I'm physically tired. And if that's the case, the best thing to do is take a nap. Or it could be caused by the meditation itself. Regardless, if there's dullness, what I need to do is to watch it as soon as it begins. This is particularly important with dullness, because when the mind is dull, there's no energy. In order to investigate, I need energy. But if there's no energy, I can't do anything. There was one Burmese teacher in Thailand, Ajahn Asaba, who recently died. He used to talk about this in terms of the classic hindrance of sloth and torpor. This is the dullness. And he would say, sloth and torpor is number one communist. By that he meant, for him it was the worst of the hindrances, because by its very nature there was no energy with which to work with it. So it's important to catch it early. Now, catching it early is part of the understanding. I'm following the breathing and the mind is beginning to change. It's beginning to get a bit duller. If I'm just focused on the breathing, I won't notice. But if I'm monitoring the whole experience, I do notice. This is odd, this is interesting. The mind is getting dull. So the first question would be, when does the mind get dull? Does it get dull on the inhalation or the exhalation? Sometimes I ask that question in the interview, and often the meditator would say, I don't know. To which the answer is, find out. Have a look. And often when you look, you find it's on the exhalation. Because on the exhalation is when the body relaxes. And also the chi, the energy, the air element goes up, boom, into the head. Often that's when the dullness starts, and that's how it develops. If you notice that, then you start to take action. One possibility is you just follow the inhalation, and on the exhalation you start to look at physical sensation. Inhalation, sensation. Inhalation, sensation. Another possibility would be you drop the breathing altogether and do sitting touching. In sitting touching, you pull back your awareness to the whole body, reconstruct the posture so the body is straight. You're feeling the whole body. You'll find the sensations at the base of the body very strong. And then from there, you ask yourself, what is the clearest, strongest sensation right now? And you send the awareness there. And then you pull the awareness back. Where is the clearest, strongest sensation right now? Send it there. Pull it back. Where is it now? Boom. Pull it back. Where is it now? Boom. And start moving the point of awareness from one sensation to another to another. Looking for the clearest, strongest, most obvious sensation. So you start to move the point of awareness around. You don't know where the next place will be. So you have to stay alert. The fact that you're deliberately moving the point of awareness around takes energy and it generates energy. So the mind becomes energized, and then at some point the breathing becomes apparent again, just becomes obvious, and then you might go back to the breathing. This is part of the understanding process. It's monitoring the situation and taking action to fix the problem. Then the Buddha goes on, she trains herself to breathe in, experiencing the whole body. She trains herself to breathe out, experiencing the whole body. Suddenly you get a switch in the meditation object. It's not the breathing, it's the whole body. Sabba kaya. Literally it means the whole body, the complete body, all of the body. In the Theravada orthodoxy, this is interpreted as meaning the whole body of the breath. You follow the breathing from its very beginning to the very end and back again. Personally, this does not make a huge amount of sense to me. I suspect it means literally what it says, which is you open the awareness out to the whole body. Now, this would not be compulsory. The Buddha is suggesting a trajectory. You should never take these instructions mechanically. It's alive. It depends on what works for you at this time. But we've been talking about how sometimes we focus in on an object, on a narrow area. Sometimes we open out. And here the Buddha is talking about opening out to the whole body. And this could mean following the air element throughout the entire body, or it could mean simply opening out to the whole body, but in the context it's more likely to be following the air element, the movement throughout the entire body. Notice he says she trains herself. So here you get this element of training coming in. The whole enterprise is becoming more sophisticated, and so there's more training involved. And the verb that gets translated as experiencing is patisamvedati. Now, vedati is the verb from which we get vedana, feeling. We mentioned briefly before the verb vedati, from which we get vedana, means both to feel and to experience. So you get this verb patisamvedati. The prefixes which get added on add a certain emphasis to the verb. But essentially what the Buddha is talking about is a becoming much more intimate with the experience. At first, it's like we're watching from a distance. But the more we get into the meditation experience, the closer and closer and closer and closer we get to it. There's a growing sense of intimacy with the experience, and this is conveyed by this verb. We're getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. We experimented with the difference between watching the breathing and feeling the breathing. And some people report that when they feel the breathing, it's like they're closer, they're in it. And sometimes they say, well, I am the breathing. Whereas when there's a watching, there's a sense of separation, distance, detachment. This is the process that the Buddha is talking about, going into the meditation object, becoming more and more intimate with it. So there's an increasing intimacy in the whole process of meditation. And then he says, she trains herself to breathe in, calming the body formation. She trains herself to breathe out, calming the body formation. Again, there's the breathing in and the breathing out. Here we have a training. This is something that needs to be learned and developed. And what's happening is the calming of the body formation or the body construction. This is kaya sankhara. Now, the kaya sankhara, what is that? Again, the Theravada orthodoxy would say, well, it's the breathing. Because the body is somehow constructed by the air element. But again, I think this is a bit artificial. The commentaries were written by academics, medieval academics. I think one of the problems that happened to Buddhism over its 2,500 years is that in every tradition it fell into the hands of the academics and it's barely survived. Practitioners have a very practical understanding of experience. When academics get there, they need to create little tidy systems, ideological systems that fit in with whatever belief system they have at the time. And so I think it's important when you come across any kind of academic text about the practice, whether it's ancient or modern, to be careful with it. Is the person really speaking of experience from experience? As practitioners, we are guided by the academics, by the theory, but we always measure the theory up against experience. Does it work according to the experience? If it doesn't, let it go. The experience is always the bedrock, it's always the guide. We read the theory against our experience, compare experience with the theory, and if the theory does not fit the experience, out it goes. Maybe it'll come back later on because our experience will change. But we stick with the experience. So if we ask, okay, the body formation, what is it that forms, that constructs the body? What's the Buddha getting at here? I think what he's getting at is discovering through the breathing, in this case, the conditionality of the body. Remember we talked about dependent arising, in particular when we were talking about the Four Truths. Where you have craving, you have dukkha. Where you have no craving, you have no dukkha. You have a relationship going. Where you get this, you get that. If you don't have this, that doesn't happen. The Buddha expresses this principle in a little verse that occurs again and again and again throughout the suttas. He says, when this is, that is. From the arising of this, that arises. When this is not, that is not. From the cessation of this, that ceases. Conditionality. If I find this, I'll find that. And we've been talking about this also in terms of the development of insight. We're tracking our experience in order to understand a process. And again, you get this idea of understanding. And for the Buddha, understanding always takes the form of seeing how one thing conditions another. So, for example, I might be following the breathing and I notice that the body is getting tense. What's the relationship between tension in the body and the breathing? It could be the amount of effort I'm putting into the breathing. The effort I'm putting into the breathing is tensing the body. The effort is the body formation. It's constructing the body as we experience it at that time. Or I might notice as I'm sitting there following the breathing, and as I go through the sitting, the posture is slumping. More and more. So I start off upright and I sink down. What's conditioning, what's feeding that process? Is it something to do with the breathing? Is it that I'm not making enough effort? Is it in the exhalation, the relaxation associated with the exhalation, the body starts to slump? Is that it? Is it that experiencing the whole body, I'm experiencing air element, the chi flowing through the whole body? Is it that I'm losing touch with the upward flowing air element? Something's going on. So what is it? What's conditioning this? Or in everyday activity, I might notice, for example, that I'm feeling a bit agitated, and then I notice, actually, I'm not breathing now. I've forgotten to breathe. So there's a link between my state of agitation in the mind and the tension in the body and the breathing. If I forget to breathe, I get really tight. And when I get anxious, I forget to breathe. So there's a mind-body relationship going on here. These are all examples, possibilities. But what it's about is the body formation, the body construction. What is it that constructs the body as we experience it now? And what's the relationship to the breathing? How is the breathing affecting the body? And how is the body affecting the breathing? It starts to open out. When the Buddha is talking about experiencing the whole body, he's talking about opening it up geographically from a small focus to a wider one. When he's talking about calming the body formation, he's talking about opening it up again, but not in terms of geography, but in terms of conditional relationship. What gets in the way of my calming the body and the mind? What's disturbing that process? What's causing me to be agitated? Or what's causing me to be dull? And all the time, the breathing is going on. At this point, it may be that the breathing itself is not the meditation object. I may be going out to something else, but in the background, I have the sense of the breathing. It's still going on. And then I come back to the breathing. And then I go out to look at something, and I come back to the breathing. I go out, I come back, I go out, I come back. The breathing is there as a kind of a background. If we're working with rising and falling of the abdomen, once we get it really established, it's always there. It's at the foreground. Sometimes I'm consciously with it. Sometimes I'm focused down, very narrowly, watching the detail. Sometimes it opens up, and it's quite wide. Sometimes the awareness goes somewhere else, but the breathing is in the background, the rising and falling is in the background, and as soon as I finish investigating over here, boom, the rising and falling comes back again, and it's back in the foreground. There's all these different things going on as part of this process, but you notice that the two basic directions, first of all, becoming more and more intimate with the experience, and secondly, opening out and seeing what's happening throughout the whole picture. How is this conditioning that? How does this affect that? So it starts to open out. So going in and opening out, and here using breathing as the primary object, at the centre of the whole thing is the relationship to the breathing. Then we come to the insight section. So up to now the Buddha has been talking about, we could say, the mechanics of the practice. And then he turns to the insight aspect. And this is the chorus of the sutta. In the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, the full version, there are 21 sections. So you've got 21 different possible meditation objects that are being listed, and at the end of each section there's the chorus. The chorus has a central place, and it's like the chorus in a song. When you sing a popular song, you have a verse, then the chorus. A verse, the chorus. A verse, the chorus. The verses give you a story, which is unfolding. The chorus gives you the essence of the whole thing. This chorus in the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta is giving the essence of the whole thing. The Buddha is describing the practitioner. She lives tracking body as body internally, or she lives tracking body as body externally, or she lives tracking body as body both internally and externally. Remember, he started by saying she lives tracking body as body. Then as an example, he goes through the breathing. And then he comes back to she lives tracking body as body internally or externally, or both internally and externally. What does he mean by internally and externally? And why is it important? Internally is pretty obvious, isn't it? It's like, what's going on here? I'm following the breathing, I'm following sensation, etc. Externally is what's going on out there. This is, again, it's an opening out. Some interpreters would say, well, this is noticing other people breathing, which seems a bit odd. But I don't think it's meant to be that narrow. I think he's getting at something else. When I'm meditating, I'm working internally. I'm looking at this whole process. And I can see that the physical processes come and go according to conditions. They keep changing, and they come and go according to conditions. And also there's the mind. And the mind conditions the body, and the body conditions the mind, And the mind processes are coming and going. Things are coming and going all the time. And as I follow my own behaviour throughout the day, I can see that it's conditioned by all these things happening. I then look out, let's say in this example, my fellow meditators, and I look at what they are doing. And I realise they are being conditioned in exactly the same way that I am. I'm doing the walking meditation and I turn to come back to my seat and I notice one meditator going, Now, if I'm caught up in self, I could think, oh, what a hopeless meditator. I'm much better than that. At least I don't fall over. I'm glad people don't see me like that. That must be so embarrassing. It's disgraceful. But of course, when it happens to me, I think, oh, this is terrible. I can't meditate. Everyone's looking at me. I'm humiliated. I have to run away. But if I run away, they'll even laugh at me more. When we're used to seeing the flow of experience as just conditions, we can recognise, oh yes, just as my mind becomes dull when conditions are such, so their mind becomes dull when conditions are such. Just as I have problems with this, they have problems with this. It's the same. We are the same. I realise that what I'm seeing in here is actually the same thing which is happening out there. And what's happening out there is what's happening in here. The boundaries of the self, the sense of me and everyone else, starts to weaken, starts to dissolve. And this is an aspect of anatta, of not self, which we'll be talking about probably tomorrow night. So I think what the Buddha is getting at here is he's getting at the arising of a sense of not self is starting to come. Because we talked about last night the whole idea of the dharmas, that rather than this is a mug full of water completely separate from me and independent of me, when I stick to the nature, the flow of experience, I recognise, well, this is actually the act of seeing, the act of wanting, the act of reaching, the act of touching, etc. These are the flow of the dharmas, the flow of events. I can see it in here, and from in here it starts to extend out. I can see it's out there too. That it's just the flow of events. Conditions are such, and this is the way they move. It's universal. So this is a kind of an even further opening up here to the beginnings of an understanding of anatta. And then the Buddha goes on further. She lives tracking the nature of arising as body. She lives tracking the nature of ceasing as body. She lives tracking both the nature of arising and the nature of ceasing as body. Now here we get a major turning point in the meditation practice. And this is where insight meditation begins. Satipaṭṭhāna is more than insight meditation. It includes serenity as well. Sometimes when people are meditating, there's not much happening in terms of investigation. They're just following, let's say, the breathing, whatever it is. In, out, the mind is getting peaceful and clear. Sometimes people complain about this, oh, there's nothing happening, or the mind is blank, or I'm not investigating, this is terrible. But actually, it's just developing serenity, developing the peace that we need in order to penetrate beneath the surface of things. And it's an essential part of Satipaṭṭhāna. But at some point, there's a shift, and this has to do with arising and ceasing, with impermanence. If I'm following experience in the way that we've been talking about, one thing that becomes obvious is that experience is always changing. It never stays the same. Let's say I'm following the breathing. I'm following the breathing and I notice it always changes. But if I think like that, I'm saying there's one thing, the breathing, and it's subject to change. In the foreground is the breathing, and in the background I notice that it changes. Now the Buddha says, instead of she lives tracking breathing, or she lives tracking body as body, in this case the breathing, here he says she lives tracking the nature of arising and the nature of ceasing as body. There's a shift. What's happening is it's like a foreground, background shift. Instead of following the body, let's say the breathing, and noticing in the background, oh, it's always changing, I suddenly realise what's happening is what I'm following is change itself, and yes, this change is happening in the breathing. It's this movement where what is before in the background, suddenly it's now in the foreground. So what I'm tracking is the nature of change itself. When this happens, that's the beginning of insight meditation. Because now, technically, the object of meditation is the nimitta, the sign of impermanence. This is the beginning of insight meditation. And this beginning cannot be controlled. I can't decide I'll do it at 8:30 tonight. It happens when it happens. It's not under our control. Up until then, I'm following the breathing, I'm noting other things, I'm opening out and seeing conditionality, as we've been talking about. But broadly speaking, this is still in the realm of serenity. And then suddenly there's a shift, very subtle. At first I might not even notice it, and I suddenly realise I'm not noticing things which are conditioned, I'm noticing conditionality itself. And this is, again, it's going deeper and deeper and deeper into experience, and the perception itself is changing. Further, her mindfulness is established on there is body to the extent necessary for understanding and continuous mindfulness. So this is another move. Mindfulness is established on atti kayo, is the expression. Kayo is body, atti is the third person singular of the noun to be. It is, or there is. So atti kayo could be translated as body is, or you could translate it as there is body. Now what he's getting at is this. We're becoming more and more and more intimate with the experience. We're seeing the conditionality of the experience. Everything changes and everything influences everything else. The impermanence of things is becoming increasingly obvious. We're even getting a sense of the not-selfness of things, the internal, external. And at some point we become so intimate with the experience that everything else drops away. Everything goes. It's just this. It's just body. It's just the inhalation. It's just the exhalation. And this is a full intimacy. It's just this, where everything else drops away, including the one who is doing the meditating. Forgotten. It's just this. This happens to the extent necessary for jnana and pattisati. Jnana is understanding or insight, and pattisati is continuous mindfulness, unbroken mindfulness. So all there is the flow of mindfulness, the flow of experience, completely intimate, and with that flow there's an understanding, there's wisdom, insight is developing. There's nothing else happening. The meditator has disappeared. There's no sign of the meditator. It's just a flow of mindfulness and a flow of understanding. going along with it. And this is a maturity of the practice where the whole thing has become completely natural. There's nothing special about it. Of course, to get to this point, this is one of the reasons why we emphasize the importance of mindfulness in everyday activity. If we think that meditation is a special thing that we do when we sit in a certain posture or walk up and down very slowly, it's very, very difficult to get to this stage. We need the mindfulness to be as continuous as possible. Now, this is not being perfectionistic. Remember, we said how when we start to study the flow of mindfulness throughout the day, we notice how often we forget. But that's the point. We notice how often we forget. It's the noticing which is the mindfulness. If we build up this momentum, then we get this sense of simply the flow of mindfulness throughout the day and a complete intimacy with the experience, where all this stuff about meditation methods and so on, it's all gone. It's just sitting here. It's just listening. It's just walking. It's just talking. It's just eating. It's just washing, etc. And then the Buddha says, and she lives independently, not clinging to anything in the world. Here you have the idea of dependence and clinging. Now normally we depend on and we cling to certain things. So for example, if I'm a meditator, I come to SBS to do a retreat, I depend on, I cling to the idea that I should be making progress in my meditation practice. And so I constantly judge the experience. Is it good enough? Is it not good enough? Is this sitting okay? Do I give it a tick or do I cross it off? We depend upon things. We cling to things. So I've got to have this. I've got to be that person. I have to appear the right way in front of people. Or I've got to have the right experience, and so on. The Buddha is talking about the maturity of the practice where I'm not dependent upon anything. I'm not holding on to anything. She lives independently, not clinging to anything in the world. This is the maturity of the practice. This is as far as the practice itself will take us. Technically, this would be when equanimity has become strong and is predominant in the experience. And then he finishes, this is how a practitioner lives, tracking body as body. So this last section is about the arising of insight, and again, the different facets of that. Not necessarily in that order. Don't take it in a linear way. First this, then this, then this, then this. You may get a flash of one thing and then it's gone. Then you get a flash of something else and then it's gone. The way the practice works, and especially the way insight works, is it's not linear. Sometimes you see something completely unexpected, and even, according to the books, out of order. One of the odd things about being a teacher is you get to see this among meditators. Sometimes a meditator who's just starting out will come in and give a report about an experience, and you think, what on earth is this person doing with that experience? That shouldn't be happening for 5 or 10 years at least. They've got no business being there. But just spontaneously, innocently, there it is. So things can happen in any order, in any kind of way. But what the Buddha is doing is presenting an overall framework that we can get a sense of, the general sense of direction and the sorts of things that might happen. We can see the continuity of mindfulness. He begins by saying the practitioner lives tracking body as body. Towards the end he's saying mindfulness is established on body is, or there is body, to the extent necessary for understanding and continuous mindfulness. So the continuous mindfulness shows maturity. You notice the importance of continuity. Again and again that's emphasized. Keep it going all the time. It's not huge effort all the time, but it is reminding ourselves again and again. I am already aware. I don't have to do anything to be aware. I just have to remind myself I am already aware. And so sometimes there's a lot of energy and there's a lot of concentration. Other times it's very ordinary. That the continuity of the mindfulness. And secondly, the going into the meditation object, becoming more precise with it. When we see the precision, that's when impermanence becomes apparent. The more precise we are, the more obvious impermanence becomes. The intimacy, the feeling aspect, we feel our way into the experience, become increasingly intimate with the experience. We open up the whole body geographically, but we also open up to the whole network of conditional relationships. We begin to recognise that what's true in here is also true out there. What's true out there is true in here. So it really starts to open up. Impermanence itself becomes the meditation object. The fact of change itself becomes the meditation object. And again, a full intimacy. There is body. The Buddha is returning to this theme of intimacy. And what this leads to is to live independently, not clinging to anything in the world. And one of the signs of progress in meditation is precisely this sense of independence. I know what I'm doing. I know what my experience is, and I know what I'm doing. One of the reasons in the interviews I keep asking, so what's the experience? A person might say, well, I'm following the breathing, and I'm doing pretty well. I'm staying with it for 30 minutes. And I might say, so what's the experience of the breathing? You've been looking at it for 30 minutes. So what is it? What does it do? Where is it? Etc. It's to stimulate this sense of precision, that I'm really watching it. And it's partly to stimulate a sense of confidence. I know what my experience is. I'm not in any doubt about my experience. This is what it is. And from that comes a confidence in what we're doing. I know what I'm doing. And so we start to become independent of what we read as being the correct meditation method. Everyone's trying to sell us the correct meditation method. But we're the ones who have to find out what it is. In the maturity of the practice, you have independence. If you have a group, a spiritual group, where people are more and more dependent, say, upon the guru, then you know something is wrong. But if people are becoming more and more independent, then something right is happening.